Okay. Hi, everyone. I think that we can start now. I would like to welcome you all in this meeting and in this webinar. I will start actually by mentioning that this is a webinar organized from DCN Global, which is supported from World Learning and also supported from Citizens Educational and Exchanges Office from State Department, whom we really thank. We have actually chosen this topic, evaluating current cybersecurity threats, before the events in Belarus that highlighted the importance actually of working on issues of not only cybersecurity, but also on other measures that will protect journalists and their work. Today with us, we have actually the distinguished speakers. Juliana Harsianti, she's journalist, independent researcher from Indonesia. Jean Couret, which is founder and CEO of the IQ Foundation from Malaysia. Sofina Kio-Lanson, which is co-founder of C-Secures. My name is Nikos Panagiotou. I am associate professor at School of Journalism and Mass Media Communications and Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and head of DCN Global. And together with Rasi Saxena, which is a social innovator and a very important expert, we will moderate this session. I would like to thank our speakers for joining us, and also you. I would like to pass the floor to Jean. Jean, thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
I believe that the order was going to be for Juliana to start, Rush?
Yes, but it was from Juliana. Let's start, but before that, let me just pass the floor to Rasi as well to say a few words, and then to Juliana. I'm sorry.
Right.
Hi, everyone. So welcome to this important webinar. Just setting the itinerary in action. We have Juliana going in first, who's an independent journalist and a UN IGF MAC member, followed by John F. Kuralt, who's the founder and CEO of the IO Foundation that works extensively in Southeast Asia. And then we have Sofina, who is the founder of SheSecure, who would go next. So I then move it on to Juliana. We would typically have an introduction and opening statements from all the speakers, followed by an informal Q&A, and then we will open it up to audience questions.
Okay, thank you, Rasi, for introduction, and welcome to participants join our discussions. I think I will start the presentation with some flashback to remind what happened about the 14 months ago when the pandemic began. At that time, the situation caused by the pandemic has been getting worse, continue when many governments impose lockdown, and since then, people doing activities from the home online. From shopping, learning, communicating, exercise, everything is going online. At this time, internet, which has been part of our life for decades, is getting more important. Every changes might trigger with side effect. And when the use of internet is massive, we start to see the side effects slowly come into the surface. First side effect is digital divide. Before the pandemic, we mostly know that digital divide generally occur in remote area or somewhere with geographically challenges. But during the pandemic, our eyes open and see that even in the big city, digital divide exists. It has hurt people who rely on the internet connection on the library, cafe, and school. And not to mention people who living in suburb area, close with the big city, but where not many people live there, and the developer thinks it's costly to establish the towers for the internet connection there. Now we move into another problem which become the topic in our discussion. It's about cybersecurity. When mostly of people in the world connecting with the internet, it seems because the easy target for malicious groups, and they take advantage from this situation. The most famous example, what we call Zoom bombing, when the unwanted guest has been attacked, the meeting with an inappropriate picture or wording. And shocking situation, of course, especially for us who still adapt with the new way of life. But there is a good side. The online meeting platform take a quick action. They improve the security feature on theirs, and day by day, a meaningful improvement has been made. A situation when in normal times perhaps needs longer to find a flaw and make progress on it. Another challenge that has arisen during the pandemic is online bullying on women and young girls. As they spend most time online, they started to browse interesting applications, dating apps, or only a chat with platforms as Telegram, Facebook, and so on. Some of them started to active writing blog, posting their photo on Instagram, or get involved on online discussion. Then they started the bad experience on some kind of online bullying, from body shaming, sexist comment, until life-threatening, both online and offline. This is a kind of worrisome because it will make the young girl, as they have bad experience on their first contact with internet, afraid about the safety on the online world. A report by the Alliance for Affordable Internet said that women and girls who doing online activity is less than men and boys. And the number is decreased when women and young girls has the experience on online bullying. They have tendency to back off from the online platform and starting to self-censorship. A report made by Indonesian National Commission on Violence Against Women in Indonesia also confirmed the situation. On their annual report, they said there is escalation on online bullying and abuse for women and young girls. It has been doing by person they know or strangers they meet in online platform. It has various form online abuse, from doxing, revenge porn, or threatening. The victim feel angry afterward, but they don't know how to report it. We then have another problem. The regulation seems not ready yet for this fast change, especially on the regulation on cybersecurity. In the case on cyberbullying, the authorities in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia in general still have to process on the regulation along with the cybersecurity. And the situation is not favorable for the victim. And this is indeed a chance for the various party to take advantage. Almost all countries in Southeast Asia has experienced some degree on online bullying, but there is minimum support from the authorities. Even though some civil society has a fast move and organized some capacity building for tackle the problem on cyberbullying. They has organized detailed security training and create a hotline for report and counseling for the victim of online bullying. On the training, both first user and regular user feel excited, they feel excited, have more time to explore anything online, but doesn't aware about the danger. They don't apply digital security before they cause the trouble. It still needed a time to open mind for many people to implement on digital security on daily life as a prevention action. And what the next step? Nationally and internationally, especially in Southeast Asia, I think we still have a lot of homework. Countries in Southeast Asia still don't have any specific regulation on cybercrime and cybersecurity. Indonesia, my country, specifically only has the law on electronic information and transaction. But implementation even become backlash for the victims, and it's even more case during the pandemic, especially regarding the COVID tracing application. Singapore once has used the COVID tracing data for the police officer, although can cancel out afterward after the protest from the user. When we talk about regulation, international and national, I think we have to start from the national level, because if one country doesn't have any regulation for govern anything related with cybercrime and cybersecurity, it will be an obstacle to implement any international regulation. Generally, international regulation and multi-stakeholder cooperation is still important to govern the cybersecurity and give the guidance the countries to implement into national level. But national law is still something give more attention, since it's more close with the daily life in country and region. And when talk about ratification international law, it needs a further discussion in national level, because it's related with regulation as well as political situation. I will finish the presentation and looking for the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliana. Now move on to John F. Corral from the I Foundation. John, the floor is yours.
Sure, I was taking some notes about what Juliana was mentioning. Allow me to do this very awkward transition when someone has to share their screen. It takes a few seconds, bear with me. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So the topic that we are discussing today definitely could be, a whole conference of 3 days on itself, and we are trying to go as compact as possible for the time that we have. So bear with me. I'm going to try to throw quite a significant amount of information. You can always go back during the Q&A. So it doesn't matter who I am right now. I already discussed this. We're going to be discussing about evaluating some current cybersecurity threats. In a very particular angle, my organization looks at digital rights from a data-centric perspective. So we look at it from an actual technical implementation, not as a platform or as a medium alone. So when we look into the problems that we have in terms of cybersecurity, we are looking into how are we implementing the different norms that we are expecting and the different regulations and the different protections that we are hoping to be having. And so you have a number of regulations out there, not only specifically on cybersecurity, but also in areas such as data protection, for instance, where you would have a number of regulations and rights that should be transparently implemented into the technology. And unfortunately, for a number of reasons that we're going to be looking into now, they aren't. And there isn't a framework for this to be happening. Now, there's a huge fallacy, which is basically all of you must be nothing short of a hacker. So you need to know what are your devices, how to manipulate them, how to use them, how to configure them, how to protect them, how to install software to protect it, how to keep them updated, how to understand when there is a specific backdoor in software. You need to understand the nature of data, which is still very complex even for technologists. You need to understand data protection laws that are protecting your data depending on your jurisdiction, which can have variances depending on where your data ends up once it leaves your territory. You need to be updated if a data breach happens. You need to first understand what a data breach is, which is not straightforward in all cases. And not all jurisdictions have a mandatory situation to inform the user about the data breach situation. Then you need to find a lawyer if you decide to pursue that particular case, and have the money to hire the lawyer and have the patience and the resources to be able to sue the company where that happens. And good luck if that distribution includes third-party companies. It's an absolutely complex situation. The burden of observance is too much into the shoulders of the final user, and it really makes no sense. There isn't an equivalent situation as you have in any other single industry or service, whereby before a product or service being put into the market, it typically goes through an agency that is going to double check compliance. That doesn't happen with public consumption software. And so we have a very good problem here where basically all of you must be experts. And the idea is that in any other industry, there's going to be experts taking care of how things are implemented transparently for you. Now, this is a very summarized comparison in terms of what are human rights based on versus data-centric digital rights. I can't really spend much time on this, but I can make the distinction that the reason why we were able to understand what human rights were because we made a very good reasoning that the core element in the human rights conversation were people, were humans. And from that point on, we were able to build a narrative of what were the personal harms that people could be subject to, and therefore we were able to establish what were going to be the digital rights, the human rights that we wanted to proactively enact in order to avoid those particular harms. And once you have those human rights, you can also expand the conversation as to duties of care for government and so on. When it comes to technology, you need to look at it from the data perspective. It's not humans who are at the center of the conversation, it's the data itself. And so when you transpose the same reasoning, you start looking at what are the digital harms that data can be exposed to. And once you have that taxonomy, then you can start thinking about what are going to be the digital rights that you want to apply. The reason why this is important is because the people who are implementing this are technologists. They're not lawyers. And if they don't have a language to understand exactly what is it that they're trying to prevent, they will not be able to implement all of those regulations that we are so much concerned about transparently into the technology. The reason why two architects can make sure that a building don't collapse is because they have a language to understand exactly what it is, the harm of a building collapsing. It kills people. And now that you have that name, now that you have that language, you can start working. And in fact, you spend several years in university learning how to avoid that in as much proactively as possible. For as long as we don't involve taxonomy and proper language to technologies, they are not going to be able to help us, and they need to be part of it. Because the reality is that programmers are the next generation of rights defenders. They are the ones who are implementing all of this stuff that we are so much concerned about. If they are not properly educated and they don't have access to all of these concepts, how do you expect them to be able to do anything about it? Think about how detached from an emotional perspective programmers typically are. And tell me, when was last time that you heard about any computer science faculty that is providing training on human rights and or digital rights, even from a technical perspective? That's not happening. They barely even have public speaking abilities. So how do you want them to turn into actual agents of change and participate in places in fora such as policy making working groups or open source open working groups for international standards if they don't have the ability nor the language to do so? Now, the reason why you want to do all of this, the reason why you want to start having a good standard for everyone to work behind and to get behind it and to train the right people so that these things are going to be implemented transparently is because, big surprise, we are not the people anymore. We're actually the cyborgs. And if anyone thinks that this is an overstatement, I invite you to send me your smartphones and I will ask you this question again in 1 week time. The fact that the phone is not connected to your body directly does not make it any different from being a limb of yours. All of your senses, your arms, your voice, and your ears, all of those are communication methods. And you communicate to the extent of the reach of those senses. So my voice can go all the way to, let's say, 20, 50 meters. And that's as far as it goes. But what the smartphone is doing is to be able to amplify that and to remotely connect with a lot of people. And nowadays, you cannot imagine any type of communication that doesn't expand beyond your neighborhood. Your work, your social life, your friends, your lovers, everyone is all around distributed. And that particular device has become a part of you. Imagine having an arm that is given to you that is not in proper health, and that you don't know exactly how it's been built and what are the safeguards that are being implemented transparently for you. You wouldn't feel very, 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 very happy about it. Think about what happens with vaccines nowadays with COVID-19. A lot of people have suspicions about how things are being implemented. And the concern is not when the vaccine is in the vial. The concern is when the vaccine is going to be put into your arm. I'm not saying that they're good or bad. That's not my point. My point is that the concern comes on when you integrate something into your body. And smartphones nowadays are part of your body. We need to start accepting that as soon as possible, because otherwise we are losing here a big chunk of the conversation and the consequences of it. Now, I always like to part with this particular, it's a joke among technologies, it's a very nerdy joke. For those of you who have any technical background, it probably resonates very, very easily. What this means is that when it comes to technology, we can be very proactive, which is something that is very difficult in our traditional regulations. On a daily basis, when someone legislates, they are usually very reactive. Something really bad happened, and they would realize that it was a problem, and then you start putting together some regulations in order for that to happen anymore. And typically, there are systems of remedy. So let's say, for instance, if someone hits me from the back of my car, I can have the potential claim for an insurance for my bill in the hospital. And that's a system of remedy. Now, what I would prefer is to not run into the accident to begin with. That would be the ideal situation. But when it comes to technology, we have the ability to do that. But in order to do that, we need to involve the actual people who are going to be implementing all of these things, which are technologists and very specifically programmers. Thank you.
John, for the lovely presentation. And we now go to Sofina. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. There's been a lot of things said. I'm wondering, how do I fit in all those things? There are like so many concepts and so many thoughts being shared. And for me, I think I just want to come from the aspect of how this whole, between 2020 and 2021, the kind of impact that the digital world has had from the pandemic down to the movements that also took place in terms of digital rights that were affected and impacted as well. So I'd say that COVID-19 really did accelerate like a lot of digitalization around the world. It's sort of created like a whole digital shift in a way that people started saying how they could actually be impacted both digitally and more online, in the way that cyber criminals thought that they could actually exploit the events that were happening. We could also see a shift in the way organizations started taking controls or taking like a whole, their business continuity plans very seriously. You see people who were not really sure of how certain events might actually disrupt their organization or disrupt their movement. But eventually when those things happen, they will start wondering that, okay, this is how it should look like, or this is what an actual incident would actually happen, and it could actually disrupt the entire world globally, and nobody would know which approach would actually have worked better. You're all just going to scramble through and say, okay, which of this business continuity plan could I use? Which one would actually be fitting for my organization, and which one would actually be fitting for my staff? So I'd say that for people, especially those who are in Africa, where that you have your counterparts in the US or in other parts of Europe being able to like build resilient systems for themselves, you find people who are in Africa not being able to like handle those sort of amount of pressure, because it's nothing like they have seen before. You see this kind of thing thrown at you on a certain month of the day, and you're like, where do I pick up from? Where do I start to build my resilient team from? How do I build my incident response team to handle this kind of thing? How do we move from a working environment, like a work from home environment? It's like a whole total shift to what they are not even familiar with. And then you have like cases of where in like Uganda, for instance, where their telecommunication and their banking sectors were plunged into different sort of crises, bigger than what they had ever seen in the previous years. You see there was like a major hack that compromised the country's mobile banking network, the mobile money network rather. You see people who are like, who actually work in like a whole traditional environment of the workspaces. And now you're having people have to move working from home, and they have to start building like virtual environments and things for their staff. And they cannot even imagine or fathom like, how do we make sure that everybody is actually logging in securely? How do we ensure that they're actually using their multi-factor authentication systems properly? People want to be safe. Obviously, everybody wants to be safe. But imagine the kind of pressure that it puts on them when they have very limited resources and they have very limited staff at the foreground trying to like combat every single thing happening at the same time. You also talk about like you have like there was this approximately $3.2 million that was estimated to have been stolen just from that incident that happened in Uganda. We also talk about like the hackers who had actually tried to like purchase about 2,000 mobile SIM cards, because they were trying to like also defraud citizens through the COVID pandemic scams that were going on. The dark market was actually increasing in terms of the money that they were making during that period of time. You see another hospital in South Africa that was actually impacted by a large cyber attack as well, with over 6,500 health beds with what do you call it, being breached through the healthcare provider and forcing them to switch back to manual systems. So when you look back, there are like tons and tons and tons of cases that this has actually impacted. So it's not like anybody would have envisioned that this cyber threat would have happened like a year back. You might have envisioned that, oh yeah, we can actually get hacked or we can actually get breached. But to the extent that it was going to impact the entire world and the kind of the sort of shift that it was going to have in terms of both the African nations and other EU nations, I don't think anybody actually thought about that. So that part as well, where they have like the healthcare being able to like be hit in that particular time when everybody is trying to see how do we keep people alive, how do we get vaccines to people, how do we get healthcare, how do we get things to people, and then you're having people who are in the background. The cyber criminals, they don't really care. They don't care. As long as they find an opportunity around them, they will definitely find a way to exploit it. It doesn't come to them that they have to sit back and wait for you. Oh, okay, when is the perfect time for us to strike? Once there is a viable opportunity for them, it's like, okay, let's hit it. And the South African hospital at that point in time was a very good target for them, and you're able to like put them offline and set them offline for that particular period. We also find another Central Bank of Nigeria, and we have other countries in Tunisia, Ivory Coast, we have Morocco as well, all trying to like sound alarms during that particular year of how businesses ought to be resilient, how they have to improve their security measures. Well, come of it, we know that everybody knows this sort of things. We know that we have to build good policies. We know that we have to build good strategies. We know that we have to be as resilient as we can, really. But if you don't have the right people, if you don't have enough staff, you're just going to be putting pressure on the number of people who are already trying to do their job to keep everybody at bay. You're just going to be trying to do everything to like make them feel burning out easily. That was another thing that resulted as well. With this whole cybersecurity threats, there's a pressure from the team to be like, okay, how do we ensure that we don't get hacked again, like the other banks that got hacked, or how do we ensure that we don't get offline, like these other people who have gotten offline? So it's like it puts a lot of tons of pressure on the cybersecurity staff that are already working within the firm or within a particular organization. But then it does like create like a whole room for discussions and conversations amongst the what they call the stakeholders among these different organizations globally that we have. It gives them the opportunity to like build on more initiatives and more strategies that could help them within the private sector, within like the community researchers that we have around in cybersecurity. It gives another room for people to like just really engage with other experts really and come up with like ideas that would help like facilitate or build the industry going forward. Also talking about like the vulnerabilities that might have happened as well, that might have been heightened as a result of this of the pandemic and everything that might have happened. I think that we ought to like start reviewing like a more coordinated and maybe dedicated commitment to building cybersecurity, not just within our own private or personal organizations, but within the government as well, because they are doing their own things and they're just like, yes, they operate and they have the resources and they have the tools and everything, but they need to know from people who are on the front line or who are on the foreground of like, what are we using, or what kind of tools are you guys actually using, or what kind of helps do you need? It might just have been at the surface layer or everything, or if they don't get to know what other researchers are working on, or what kind of tools are being created, what kind of avenues do they need to actually help them get those sort of policies out there, then it's probably going to be in vain. And and also another part as well, I think, and I should comment when I remember when I was in June was speaking as well, the part of like digital and human rights as well, like when the whole George Floyd thing and everything happened, you see cyber activists and you see human rights activists being the target of, let's say, online bullying or like real-time attacks and everything coming onto them, and they're being like undisclosed groups of trolls. You see cyber criminals as well being being the whole threat actors, or being like changing their whole mode of operations and having a whole new level of attack attack vectors that they're being disclosed to those activists and those popular groups them as well. But we also saw people who were taking like their security very seriously. People say moving on or migrating to signal messengers more often. People said seeing more more changes in the way people handle their social media. They were not really just disclosing things that they wanted to. They took things more seriously. They had ways that they could protect people when they were going out for protests, for all those kind of protests as well. So I think the organizations that were advocating for those racial justices and all those liberal liberties and everything, they were fully threatened during that period of time. Even this from 2020 to 21, we have seen like an increased number of threats down to prominent organizations as well that have been impacted based on this online and online attacks. We also had Cloudflare, which said that they had realized that denial of service attacks had actually heightened between the time of April 2020 down to the time of May, June 2020 as well, that they had actually not expected. So you find like all these kind of reports, and you just imagine and you say that, okay, sometimes you might be prepared for them, or sometimes you might say, oh, I'm actually like very well grounded, or I have my organization very good, and we have all the tools, we have all the resources, we have all the people in ground, and then something comes to you and you're really not sure where to go to, or where you have to do. You see people working overtime, or you've seen security professionals working overtime to ensure that the organizations don't get hacked as well. You've seen people who have just been like targets, pretty much been targets online, and it's been been really, really crazy. And oh well, yeah, I think I'm just really like going to summarize and say that for me, I feel like the cybersecurity threats and how it has envisioned and how it is has changed over time. It's the fact that sometimes you might be well prepared for something, but then a global pandemic like this can come and then change things up, and you're now wondering yourself, like, am I really prepared for this sort of attacks that are coming to me? Because it changes based on the situation that is on ground. It changes based on, it sort of camouflages based on what is operating at the moment, or the kind of environment that's working at the moment. And at the same time, sometimes we just shouldn't think that every other organization is doing as well as you think. The fact that where you're in probably Europe or you're there doesn't mean that your other counterparts were like maybe Africa or in the other parts of where they have different threat scenarios or different threat vectors that they might be going through. And it's all about coming together and building like some strategies that can actually help those sort of organizations or those sort of communities then build a more robust defense measure or more robust defense mechanisms going forward. Yeah, really. And hopefully we have like more of those strategies or more of those partnerships or collaborations that would help them build a sort of more robust defense mechanisms going forward. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for introduction. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Safina. So I had some questions and follow-up questions to everyone on the panel here. So from a layman, like someone who doesn't have technical expertise in cybersecurity, what do you think are the biggest risks for 2021 and beyond? Like what do you think that we as an audience or we as citizens, global citizens, should be wary of? So someone wants to answer that? Perhaps John could go first.
Okay, the risks, right, for 21 and beyond. So there's quite a number. Let's see if we can keep it short. So as I was discussing before, there's still no proper work done on the area of digital harms and digital rights, and on not preparing programmers. So when you look into how what has been the exponential growth of adoption in terms of services and devices during the 2020 and 2021, you can only expect that this is just going to be accelerating. And the kind of technologies that we're being exposed to nowadays, and I'm not talking about only Facebook and the traditional platforms. I'm talking about things such as Neuralink, for instance, where for those who haven't heard, Elon Musk has one of his different endeavors. One of them is Neuralink, and they're building a chip that you will be able to connect to your brain, and that will allow you to have traditionally, or let's say, direct connection to networks. They claim that there's going to be very limited in terms of the information that you're going to be able to transmit and so forth. But it's the evolution of what I was mentioning before, the smartphone being part of you. And so for as long as we don't have these transparent protections that are implemented at the standards level, we're going to have a lot of issues as to what is the kind of information that is being handled and how. I would say that on another level, governments keep failing to understand the nature of data. That's one huge conversation that they don't seem to be. I don't know if I struggle to determine if they are willingly not having it, or they just don't know that they have to have it, or that they are not getting the right advice. There's this misconception that data is some sort of magical dust that is surrounding us, and like a wizard, I take some of it, put it into a black box or a cauldron with software, and I end up having a very magical and halfway mystical positive result. That's not really what it is. There's a huge connection between us and our data, and in fact, it's one and the same for a number of reasons. And the fact that we are having this disconnect doesn't really allow governments to have proper protections when it comes to cybersecurity. There's also, I would also point out, a problem on the concentration of power in very few private companies that is definitely not being properly managed by governments. And on occasions, it really feels that it is because some of those companies become the executioner arm of those governments, and because there is not necessarily a liability to be had from an institutional perspective. It's okay to have your minion who's going to impose a number of restrictions or a number of considerations in technology at big scale, and you can basically stay clear of international political liability. I would say that those are the three that I can think of.
I think maybe I could add to what you said about the government's reaction. I just think that many of them might not have the technical literacy, because you have so many of their portals, especially in India, falling into cybersecurity breaches and being hacked. So I think that's one aspect that they perhaps need to go through. And yes, they look at it more like a magic wand that can actually solve policy issues. So we have Juliana, maybe you have something to share in terms of what do you think are the pressing cybersecurity challenges at hand, and what do you think that women who are more vulnerable perhaps to being harassed should be wary of?
Okay. I think when I give the training on cybersecurity on young women, on journalists and common people, they think they don't need to protect themselves from the cyber harm because they nobody, so they think this cybersecurity is implemented for the people who well known and and something, and they don't care about it. But when they cause some trouble, they still thinking, oh yeah, we have to start thinking about the digital security and so on, and pay attention about the gadget and what the data they share, and yeah, they start to thinking about it. But I will respond what Jen said about the gap between the lawyer technologies and the implementation about the data regulation where they had been preparing by the government. This is maybe different experience in some country, but in my country, in Indonesia, I'm following the draft of data protection regulation, and it seems the government has get the advice from the wrong side. They don't get the right advice about the technology, because when they prepare the draft and they put on the public for the comment, there is a lot of hole on the regulation that has been repaired, and then and they don't talk much with the technologists to when they preparing the law. But they said that it is difficult to discuss between the technology and lawyer and regulator, and then the policymaker when they preparing the regulation. Then it is still long way to go, and long way to go to preparing the regulation when they don't have any common mind between the technologies, lawyer, and the government. Yeah.
Thanks, Juliana. Safina, perhaps you want to comment on those questions?
Sure, yeah. What present cybersecurity challenges are around? I'd say since we all like started working or moved on to like this hybrid working environment, the work from home, the most challenging thing was probably when people had to like, or when organizations had to like start rolling out virtual working environments, and how they needed to start training staff on how they could actually like keep themselves safe with their, like, while working from home. Those sort of additional trainings and reinforcements and things that you have, people might have forgotten initially. When you start working initially, they might have like whole trainings back and forth and getting you accustomed to the environment and everything. But now it's like, it's not a traditional workspace environment that you have, but now having to like deal with yourself while you're working from home, having to go all this email simulation tools, having to know phishing that might come in different forms as well. You might even have like smishing attacks being on the rampart, or like an increased heights in them, smishing attacks being given out, and people have to like be safe, and companies don't want to lose like amounts of money or dollars and everything. So they have to invest in like a lot of trainings that they would not have actually envisioned initially when the year started. There's also like the problem of like not enough adequate like skilled staff or cybersecurity staff, and exactly there's no matter how much we all like multiply to ourselves, I feel like there are like lots of people who are in the technology or the cybersecurity space, it's still like very little compared to like the amount of work that they have to be doing right now. So there's like a whole lot of like new need for automations and things. People are having like all these monitoring tools and everything, but like they still like keep on reinventing the wheel, whereas they have to be like automating the processes that they need to do all these things. And people need to be able to control those sort of automations that are going in. You need programmers, you need people who are in DevOps, people who are like in DevSecOps as well, actually being able to like drive those sort of automations that are going on or that are being like started. We have to start training those professionals as well. So there might be people who might be skilled, but like they are not adequate enough to actually handle the current landscape or threat landscape that we already have existing at this period of time. So well, I'll just say that regardless of everything, it's easier to like reboot what do you call it, your infrastructure. It's easier for you to like reboot your system or reboot that kind of your server or whatever, but you might not be able to reboot a human being when they know that they probably shut down or they can't do whatever you're trying to tell them to do because they are not equipped for it, or they've not been trained to do that. So it's more or less being able to like invest in your upskilling your staff or invest in upskilling the current talent that you have in your organizations right now. And yeah, pretty much that as well. And a lot of time as well, the challenge as well that people that I saw a meme, I don't know if it's a meme or a meme, but somewhere where it says that a lot of the people who are in this cybersecurity spaces and stuff, they spend so much time building like a lot of meetings. You have a lot of like virtual meetings and calls setting up, but then not enough time is actually spent implementing or actually building the strategies or the things that will actually help you have a very great defense mechanism or defense strategies that you actually should be having. So there's not enough amount of time spent in actually being productive than the amount of time that they've spent at the board doing CTO meetings or CSO meetings and every single back and forth conversation that keeps on going on. There should be more time spent in the actual execution of the program or execution of the plan that you have than having like the whole going back and forth calls that you typically would have on a regular like virtual working from home environments that people have right now. So yeah, I think I'd say that more or less it's the fact that there has been a shift in the hybrid working environments. There has been like the lack of cybersecurity talent that we have as well, and being the fact that people have to start spending time also training and upskilling the talents that they have. Lastly, I would say not having to use like all this legacy and old infrastructure tools that we have existing. There are things that might be in the industry that has not been used for quite a time or that might not be as functional as we want them to be. And if there are not people testing them, you might not be able to know what new indicators of compromise are already existing. How do you know that they're actually being able to combat the modern threats that are actually coming on right now if you're still using tools that are dated back to 2015 or 2014 that might not be able to like tell you what is actually happening currently or the new attack measures that are being sent by an intruder currently. So it's more or less being able to like having to like move up according to the trends and times, being able to like change those things as they come on, adapt them, modify them if you have to modify them, if you have to create or move on to new infrastructure tools within your organization or within your firm, you should be able to do that as well. And create environments whereby the intruder or the actor doesn't become invisible to your infrastructure or to your environment. You're able to see them in whatever form that they come in, even if it's like a signature threat or if it's a what they call non-signature threats or whatever they might come in any form, really. Just being able to like just know that you have to actually like change from those legacy tools and start moving on to like modern day tools or infrastructure tools as well. And have to know that you should be able to see your environment and should be able to see new threats as they come on and not start seeing like things that already existing like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Yeah.
Thanks, Safina. Perhaps we, since in the interest of time, we could open it up to audience questions, Nikos?
Yes, I agree. Also to open it up to any further questions from the audience. I think it is a very interesting topic as it has been highlighted from everyone. And if you allow me for a quick, let's say, comment, it is the fact that it has been presented from all over the continents. The necessity to build up on these skills, the necessity actually to tackle them both as professionals and as citizens. I think that the challenge, it is even more related with the citizens themselves, on how to develop these digital literacy security skills that will also enable them to further take into advantage the elements, the opportunities that exist in the digital space. I would like to ask a question. Do you think measures that have taken place from, for example, from iOS, from Apple, in order to protect the privacy of the user, do you think that it can help towards this direction? And this is not a product placement, okay?
Well, if I may jump on that one, it is going to help curtailing some of the possible problems that they have when it comes to third-party platforms. It is still unclear to me whether it's going to also help the internal ecosystem of Apple. Now, Apple is a very interesting example to understand where governments are failing. Because essentially what governments are failing right now is to close the loop. They issue a number of regulations. They tell you what are the rights or the regulations that everyone should be following, yet they don't provide the infrastructure for those regulations to be implemented transparently. And it's pretty much when it comes to public software consumption, it's pretty much the only industry that this is happening. So for instance, you buy a car, you know that the car has been built under certain technical standards, and before being put into the market, it goes through an agency that verifies that the car is by design secure. Otherwise, it doesn't make it to the market. You can even look into this when it comes to the hardware of your phone. Any single jurisdiction would have its own regulations into what is the type of hardware and how it has to be implemented, and it will go through a number of tests, typically to make sure, for instance, that the antenna of your smartphone of that prototype does not emit beyond a certain range of ionizing radiation, so that you don't get health problems, or much more easily that the battery is not going to explode on your face. Those are things that we can relate very easily, and they can be tested. And so you get your sticker at some point in the evaluation process, and then you can go to the market. You don't have that when it comes to public consumption software. That is not happening. And the problem is because you can't verify automatically compliance in things such as GDPR. GDPR is great as a conversation started, but it's terrible when it comes to implementation. And all the data protection laws in the world are exactly on the same situation. So where Apple becomes interesting is that let's say, for instance, the iTunes server. If you have a music album that you like and you purchase, you don't purchase the album anymore. You purchase a license of exploitation for that album. And in that license, you may have the ability to deploy that, to copy that album into a number of your devices and possibly share it with some of your friends or some of your family, which is an interesting case scenario because that's the equivalent to a third-party sharing. It's going to make sense when I go back to the data protection laws. Now, if Apple decides to remove that album from the iTunes server, two things are going to happen. One, you're going to have no recourse because you don't own the album, you only own the license of exploitation. And second, that album is going to be deleted from all the devices where it was copied, including the third-party people who you may have shared it with under the terms of the license that you bought. If you look at it from the equivalent of data protection laws, as a citizen, I'm sharing my data with a service provider who in turn may share that data with a third party, depending whether I consent or not. But typically, if you go to banks, that's typically one of the clauses that they force you to go through. And at any given time, I have the right on the GDPR, at least in the case of European citizens, to request for my data to be deleted from the servers. How is that any different from licensing? At a technical level, I'm basically licensing my data, which can have access to the primary licensor and third parties, if that has been the license that I have provided. When I request my data to be deleted, it should be transparently removed. I shouldn't have to worry about it. I don't want to have the capacity only to sue them. It's fine to have that capacity, that remedy is great to have that safety net. What I want is the technology for the technology to transparently implement that law so that I don't have to worry about it. In the same way that when I buy a car, I'm not concerned as to whether the ABS system works or not. It just works. And if I get into an accident because of a problem of manufacturing, then I can go and sue the car. But the car was given to me with the reassurance that when I brake, the car brakes. That's what we don't have right now. The whole ecosystem part, the whole infrastructure to implement transparent those regulations is not being provided by the governments right now. And that's why I'm losing the battle.
No, I get that. No, I think I would like to add to that. I definitely feel that the whole infrastructure and the ecosystem on which products are built or systems are built on exploitation of data, because we just have no idea, and everything is more about a matter of convenience, where you really don't know where your data is going to go. And if you're a European citizen, you're lucky because you're even protected outside the realm of the European region. But if you are a citizen like from India, where I don't have any concrete laws and the implementations are so weak, what do you do, right? And if you have, I can just go to something as sensitive as if you have someone who's making an app to perhaps track your menstrual flow, or you're using it for really, really intimate conversations on a dating app, and then you realize that Tinder actually, hires another agency through which they had a breach, and then they had your data that was leaked. And it's just so sensitive that we're living in this, this hyper ventilating surveillance system of always sort of, being in track, and everyone wants to know what everyone's up to. So yes, we need to perhaps build more systems which are more privacy by design, I would say. We have an audience question which says, what is the likelihood that international law in the cyber domain will become a standard practice? Who wants to take that? Juliana, do you want to take that?
Hey, I don't have any background. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm studying international relations, so I try to answer. Yes, it should be a guidance, global guidance for the international activity on internet, on cyber harm and something, but it is depend on the national. It is still depend on national regulation to implement this. For example, Indonesian in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, only Philippines has ratified Budapest Convention on cybercrime security. So it is difficult to our region to talk about the international cybercrime and cybersecurity standard in our region, because our law is not complement with the Budapest Convention. Also, we still have to doing our homework in national region, but it is still far from. There's a wrong way to make the international laws some global protection for the citizen, but again, is about jurisdiction, is about national law to take the people in some part of the world, and then then is finally is the citizen, the citizen and the national itself decide which law it apply in the region.
Thanks, Juliana. I think maybe one point for Tinatin is that even GDPR took a good 30 years to come into actual fruition. So yeah, it's currently low and it's going to take a really long time.
Yeah, but and every region and every country has different infrastructure, but the cybercrime, the cyber law, and everything is example. Africa and India has different different system of law. So yeah, GDPR is good example, but yeah, still a long way to have that's kind of protection, international protection on cybercrime for whole citizen on the world.
Go ahead, John. John, go ahead. You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that highlights what I was mentioning before. So when you look into international agreements, the only way that you make them work is because you are basically on common ground of a specific need that affects everybody in the same level. If you can't have that, you won't be able to find any standard for application. So the reason, for instance, why you have international maritime laws that function is because pretty much everyone is on the same page as to what is it that you're trying to protect. When you look at the cybersecurity, for as long as you are looking into very specific interests from a specific jurisdiction or government into whatever their agenda is, to be only focused to what they want to obtain, you're going to have a lot of difficulties when it comes to interoperability to those particular regulations. How are you going to make it? How you can have a standard if my interest is, say, for instance, hoard data? If that is what I'm looking for, and that clashes with, let's say, the European style of protecting people's data, you're not going to be able to put any standard there because the needs are different and they're not going to match. So what you need to start looking into, what is the underlying commonality that unites all of those conversations? And for good or for bad, is the technology itself. So the way to unite this is by looking at technical standards. It's not going to be from application standards, from regulations. Those are going to come as a case scenario, as a utility on top of the infrastructure itself.
I have another question which says on cyber sovereignty. Should the cyber borders be treated as territorial physical borders as a part of national security? That's a difficult one. Yeah, that's a really good question. Who wants to take that? John, go ahead. You have your hand raised. Nikos, if you want to go ahead, please go ahead.
No, please, it was John.
No, I'm just waiting for my turn because I want also all the speakers to be able to participate. I'm just saying that I will add something at some point, but please, by any means.
Sophia, maybe you want to take that?
Okay, I was just going to wait for Nicholas. Nicholas should go first. I was here.
Okay, just wanted actually to comment that on what you have just said, that I think that it is the floor is for you. It's not for me, actually. I think that there is a need to move forward with an international law, or actually international protection as the one that the European Union has taken in order to protect the personal data. I think that this direction, there is a necessity now even to create or to build up a global, let's say, convention regarding the digital rights. Thank you.
Okay, I think I was just going to say, or add rather, that it's something that we could actually start working towards, like having like a cyber border, what in plain sight, or in hindsight rather. It's something that is already existing, because you probably have the US, what do you call it? If something should be launched digitally, a threat or whatever should be launched on the US cyber space or whatever, they will definitely take that as a threat or as a war or any other thing that you can actually imagine. I don't think that there is any huge distinction really between like the physical borders in terms of national security and digital security. If anything should happen right now, the threats sort of it's probably going to even be higher. The top of the pipeline that got hacked a couple of weeks ago and everything, and everybody was wondering, oh, was it the Russian people that did this, or who was the person who launched the attack? And everybody was trying to like figure out who was the source and every other thing that you can possibly imagine, or anything that you can possibly imagine. So as long as it's like it's still like tramples upon national security, there is definitely going to be like that divide between like, okay, this is like the physical threats that it's going to pose, and then there's like the whole cyber, what do you call it, the cyber threat that you might pose on us or pose on the country at large. So in terms of cyber sovereignty, I don't think there's going to be any sort of consensus between like it being one or it being like probably like the same thing or anything, but it should be treated as a sort of national security for every given state, and it's not going to be the same thing because every state has like its own rules, it has its own regulation, it has its own laws and things that it's governed by. It has its own cyber laws and everything that it's governed by as well, not just like physical security, but like in terms of like territory, in terms of how you operate online, it's like your cyber crime laws, in terms of how you govern yourself online, in terms of the kind of things that you use, in terms of the kind of people that you operate with. So if there should be anything that is going against those sort of laws or those kind of things, it should be seen as like a threat to the national security, or it's seen as a threat to like as a threat to the national security of that particular state. So I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not really like very strong on this sort of sovereign security matters, but that's just an opinion I have.
John, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. So when we talk about borders, we tend to look at borders from, pass me the expression, as this oppressing system that was put together in order to not allow us to move around and so forth. And that's not necessarily the right way to look at it. Borders have their utility. It doesn't mean that they are used properly all the time. I mean, it's clearly not the case. They also stop a lot of threats, and they establish a membrane between different, not always necessarily compatible cultures or even ethical systems. So you wouldn't be very happy, for instance, to have problems in the border crossing a specific territory. But when you think that maybe they have been avoiding certain amount of troubles, or to actually let some people who might have been troublesome or even problematic or right away terrorists, it's a very difficult conversation to be had in terms of the utility of borders. They also come from a historical perspective. They didn't just pop up one day after the other. Okay, so there was an actual evolution as to how certain territories were formed. Why did they have to enforce a specific defense, for instance, into their own territory, and how those defenses may have remained there forever and ever, even if people may have forgotten why they were set up in the first place. Some of you may have heard this fable, this metaphor of the guard that is guarding a rose. And so there's this woman who's, I think it was a princess or something, I can't remember the whole story, but there was someone looking through a window and they could see that there's a rose and a guard next to it all the time. And months pass and months pass, and there's always a guard next to one specific rose. And no one really understands why. And so someone asks and looks into it, and turns out that there was a princess 30, 50 years ago who wanted to protect that rose and put a guard there. And then she passed away, and no one ever changed that regulation. So they were just following compliance, and there had to be a guard to take care of the rose. But once you have lost that context, you think that it's a stupid thing to have a guard by the rose. Well, it came for a reason. Maybe you need to revisit the reason, but it was there for a reason. And before getting a specific ideation as to the utility of things, that context helps. So translating that to the question that was interpreted for digital, what is it that we want in order to establish those regulations from a digital perspective? Are they even possible? Yes, they are. You could discriminate a specific traffic based on geo IP, for instance. And you may want to do that because you may have certain actors that are not acting in good faith. I mean, we have the not only the Great Wall, but also the Great Canyon coming from China. You want to be able to protect yourself in case if there is any kind of aggression. It's not a joke when you think about cyber wars. And you need to be able to do those kind of preemptive protections and security. So the borders, even if we probably are translating them directly from a physicality into the digital, they are necessary. Think about botnets. You got hundreds of thousands of devices that are infected and are going to be acting in a group in order to take down services. As you know, we saw recently in the US with the recent attack in their infrastructure. I mean, those things are going to be considered, and they don't necessarily mean that someone is trying to curtail your specific rights. Typically, that comes as a consequence of another intention in terms of protecting whichever other asset. So it's going to be a quite complicated conversation. And I would add one last thing. Typically, we tend to think too much on terms of the internet. We should start looking a little bit beyond of that. First, because we don't know if the internet as we know it nowadays is going to be here in 10 years. It's quite unclear to me if that's going to be exactly under the same terms as we know. Think about Russia doing their own experiments to be able to disconnect. So we may end up having sort of connections of different networks from regional and jurisdictional areas. And the internet is not the only network where data of ours is being collected and stored and treated with or without knowledge and with or without consent. So it's better to look at it from digital domains or digital spaces or digital territories, whatever you want to call it. The internet is not the only place where you need to be concerned about.
Thank you very much. If there is no other question, I think that we should, or answer, I think that we should move at ending of this webinar. Rasi?
Yeah, sure. Maybe perhaps if there are no questions, can we go with closing remarks? And I'm going to give every speaker just 1 minute. And if you go beyond a minute, I will unfortunately have to cut you off. So we start with Sofina.
Yeah, I think I just want to say thank you first to like the DCN for this initiative and for having me like be able to like share and listen to the other speakers as well. So I'm hoping that everybody who was here has like heard something they listened to and they have like learned something from like the different threats that's been explored or evaluated from the different speakers, and really like just do what you can to like improve the current infrastructure that we have currently. If you ever have the opportunity to do that, make sure you try your best to help it and help build the cybersecurity infrastructures as you can, and improve the community as you can as well. Give back and just help people stay safe, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Sofina. Juliana?
Okay, it's nothing more from me, but yes, thank you for the opportunity to talking in this interesting webinar. So I learned many things from another speaker and discussion. And then, yeah, I don't really like the terms that we as citizens have to struggling by ourselves to protecting our cyber life. But since the regulation and everything on it is way behind, so yeah, I think we don't have choose rather than protecting ourselves, and but in the same times we can working together to demand the government to provide us the better protection on the better law. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliana. John?
I think we've been charging a lot of information already, so I'm going to be not throwing much more. Thanks a lot for inviting me to the webinar. Definitely, I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that everyone has been getting something from all the speakers. That there's always something to bring back home. I would close throwing this question. I'm still struggling with it myself, so I don't have a full concept formulated, but I'm really being on the perception that there's a part of vocabulary when it comes to technology that we are getting wrong, which is to keep calling people as users. And maybe we should start changing that into citizens the way we express them in their interaction with technology, because there's a huge difference between the definition of a user and a citizen. A user is expected to know how to use something, whereas a citizen has a number of protections by the government. And when we look into technology, there may be something there. Again, I'm struggling a little bit trying to figure out a full explanation of it, but I'm just going to drop this as food for thought just in case any of you actually comes up with a good definition. Please reach out to me. I would love to listen to it.
I can do that. I think that citizens should be at the center of this discussion, not the user. If we stick to user, then we will end up in just protecting the commercial rights and nothing more. It gets into consumer. We're more than interested as DCN to work on that issue together. I would like to thank everyone, and I would like to give the floor to Rasi to end this webinar. Rasi.
And so if there aren't any questions, I'd like to thank everyone for joining in. You can also keep in touch with us. If you all could leave, speakers could leave in their details that we could have more discussions. Also, we do have these on a monthly basis. We also have these webinars from a regional perspective. This was primarily to fit into the needs of the Southeast Asian region. We also have DC in Europe, which is pretty active. And we also have some activities for DC in Africa. So we hope that you can sign up for our newsletter and keep in touch with us. And thank you once again for joining in. That's it from my end.
Thank you all. Just to remind you that this was actually an event organized from DCN Global, supported with from World Learning. It is part of actually of our initiative about ideas in action. It is a series of virtual events that it has been launched in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. Digital Communication Network is supported by the US Department of State's Office of Citizen Exchange. We would like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you very much.